Ron Howard is known as Hollywood's nicest director, but at 71 years old, he finally shared something surprising. He named 6 actors he really didn't like working with. These weren't just small disagreements. These were big problems on movie sets. So who made Ron so upset? Which famous actor almost made him quit? In this video, we'll tell you the truth about years of hidden tension, secret stories, and rare interviews. Stay tuned, because number 2 will really surprise you. Ron Howard runs his movie sets like a calm orchestra. He's the quiet conductor with a steady beat, and everyone knows their part. The goal isn't craziness. It's control that feels natural, the kind that lets actors forget about the cameras and just act. That's why, when Tom Sizemore came to work on the movie Ransom in 1996, things changed from calm to chaotic. Sizemore was powerful on screen. He was rough, interesting, and real. That's exactly why audiences loved him. But it's also exactly the kind of wild energy that a well-planned production can't handle easily. Crew members later said there was a clear tension in the air. They felt like the scene you practiced might not be the scene you filmed, because one person's energy could change without warning. Howard's way of working is simple. Planning ahead gives you freedom. You plan everything so that new ideas have a safe space to happen. People say Sizemore's way of acting went against that rhythm. The daily schedules didn't feel like real plans. They felt like suggestions. An entrance might be amazing, then fall flat. A line could sound electric, then sound like nothing in the very next take. It wasn't about forgetting his lines or missing his spot, people said. It was about being unpredictable in a way that changed everything around him. On a Howard set, where calmness is the culture, that kind of uncertainty gets expensive fast. It costs time, focus, and trust. There was one day, people whispered about carefully, when the whole production had to completely stop. Not because the lights broke or the cameras stopped working, but because the emotional mood was wrong. Howard apparently asked everyone to reset. He was so polite, it almost seemed like nothing was wrong. There were no yelling voices and no public scolding. What he did was change the camera angles, change the order of shots, and rebuild the whole day based on the energy he actually had, not the energy the schedule expected. This is the quiet way of handling a crisis. Don't make it bigger, just contain it. The mood on set didn't explode. It just slowly deflated, but everyone understood the hidden message. When the director has to protect the rhythm that much, it's a warning sign. Sometimes the clock loses minutes. This part of the story is interesting because the movie worked. Sizemore's acting in Ransom is tense, scary, and alive. It crackles with energy on screen. Howard is really good at taking messy brilliance and making it work in clean movie frames. Sources say he did it again here, adjusting on the spot like an experienced quarterback reading a broken play. But you could see the cost in how things ran. Assistant directors, who are like the emergency nurses on a production, had to manage all the resets. Department heads had to communicate more carefully. The set family feeling Howard builds, fair, respectful, quietly supportive, had to put on armor. You can feel that kind of tension even when nobody says anything. It's there between setups and creeps into the mood during lunch breaks. People around Howard say the lesson wasn't about blaming anyone. It was more about boundaries. Passion is the soul of a film set. Discipline is the structure that keeps it going. When it becomes like spinning a roulette wheel, trust falls apart between actor and director, between director and crew, and, just as importantly, between the film and the schedule. Howard didn't lecture anyone. He just made adjustments. He reduced the unpredictable parts, increased backup coverage, and found performance moments that didn't need perfect conditions to work. In other words, he managed the chaos and saved the movie without publicly shaming the man. When Sizemore died in 2023, Howard didn't say much or write long tributes. People noticed the silence. Maybe that's the most meaningful ending. Not cruelty, just distance. For a director who values preparation, the Ransom experience became a lesson in the cost of unpredictability. The day stops, the crew waits, the plan bends, and the leader chooses to contain the problem rather than confront it. Volcano, on a clockwork set, isn't a judgment about right or wrong. It's a physics problem. Lava is fascinating to watch, but it also finds the cracks. Howard's career, built on being steady, learned exactly how to seal those cracks and how to redirect the flow without burning down the studio. If you thought Ron Howard's patience couldn't be broken, the next actor proved that wrong. When Ron Howard first walked onto the set of The Andy Griffith Show in 1960, he was just 6 years old. He was a red-haired kid from Oklahoma with natural charm that lit up the screen. To the world, he was Opie Taylor, the innocent son of Sheriff Andy, living in the perfect town of Mayberry. To Ron, the set was like a second home, and Andy Griffith felt like a second father. Griffith took care of him, encouraged his natural instincts, and taught him how to act. "Andy made me feel like I belonged," Howard once said. In those early years, their relationship was sweet, playful, and real. It was a mentorship that seemed to match the warmth of the show itself. But as the seasons continued and the pressures of success got tighter, the perfect picture began to crack. By the mid-1960s, the show was huge. Andy Griffith's name meant small-town kindness. But behind the friendly charm, people on set noticed a change. Griffith had become moody, distant, and even angry at times. The stress of carrying one of TV's biggest hits was enormous, and it started to change the mood on set. Crew members said he became controlling and quick to get angry when things didn't match his vision. Ron, now a teenager, felt the difference most clearly. The easy laughter between takes became rare. The gentle teaching turned short and sharp. It was, as one cast member later said, like watching a summer sky turn cloudy. Howard was learning his first lesson about the gap between public image and private personality. This lesson would quietly shape the director he'd later become. The breaking point maybe came over several years as Ron got older and more confident in his own skills. Howard was no longer happy just hitting his marks. He began asking smart questions about storylines, character motivation, and, in his own way, quietly challenging Griffith's authority. The father-son dynamic that had once felt natural now had tension in it. Griffith, used to doing things exactly how he thought they should be done, didn't always agree with his on-screen son's growing independence. According to crew memories, there were days when Griffith's frustration showed in sharp words or long silences. For young Ron, it was confusing. This was the man who taught him everything he knew about being professional. But that confusion grew into understanding. "You learn early how to deal with controlling personalities," he would later say, especially when someone can turn on the charm for a take, then shut it down completely between scenes. After the show ended in 1968, their relationship cooled. No fights happened, no gossip was created about them. Just distance. They never worked together again and barely talked to each other, only showing up together in public when they had to. When Griffith became a television legend, Howard moved from being a child star to becoming a new filmmaker, bringing with him the discipline he learned from his early experiences. When Griffith died in 2012, Howard's statement was short and carefully worded. "He shaped me in ways I am still understanding." No bitterness, just boundaries. As Howard started planning his own directing career, he figured out what his leadership shouldn't look like. From those early days, Howard absorbed a lesson about power that stayed with him forever. He decided that in his movies, harmony would be something he'd be known for, matching the warmth seen on screen with the warmth behind the camera. His productions were based on respect in every way, built on mutual respect and gentle communication, not on big egos. If you ask the many people who have worked with him, they always mention the contrast between his easygoing personality and the image of past directors who were emotional geniuses. For Ron, the lessons from Mayberry were less about nostalgia and more about structure. He was shown how emotional stress and ego could poison a creative atmosphere. When he started making films, he built them on cooperation, empathy, and consistency. Looking back, The Quiet Storm of Mayberry wasn't just about Andy Griffith's hidden anger. It was about the cost of leadership under pressure and how young artists learn those lessons by watching. For Howard, it became a lifelong study of managing emotions, seeing how charm hides insecurity, how respect isn't demanded through fear, and how legends have blind spots. It's the paradox of his career. America's Nicest Director was perfected in the shadows of a man who wasn't always nice. The small-town dream that shaped him growing up also taught him how fragile that dream is. how much work it takes to keep peace when the cameras stop rolling. When Ron Howard and Russell Crowe first worked together for A Beautiful Mind in 2001, it looked like a perfect match. Howard was Hollywood's reliable craftsman, a director who balanced heart with discipline. Crowe was the era's king of intensity, fresh off his Oscar win for Gladiator and respected for totally disappearing into his characters. Together, they seemed destined to make something amazing. And they did. The film won Best Picture and Best Director. But behind that graceful, polished masterpiece was a daily battle between two creative forces who approached art from opposite sides. For Howard, filmmaking was structure, teamwork, and careful planning. For Crowe, it was chaos, instinct, and the endless pursuit of emotional truth. The clash between genius and process became as dramatic as anything on screen. From the beginning, Crowe treated the production like a testing ground. Playing the brilliant but troubled mathematician John Nash, he reportedly came to set each day armed with tons of ideas, some brilliant, others confusing. He questioned dialogue, rewrote lines, and argued about camera placement with the kind of conviction usually saved for directors. Crew members described Howard as patient but clearly tired, walking the thin line between respecting an actor's commitment and protecting the speed of production. The director's sets are known for harmony and quiet focus. Crowe's energy was like a volcano, filling the room with creative tension. One assistant director later said, "Every scene felt like a philosophical fight." Russell didn't just want to act the part. He wanted to wrestle it into submission. There were moments when the tension showed clearly, though Howard was rarely angry. He's known for staying calm, for redirecting energy instead of facing it directly. But that control was really tested by Crowe's wildness. Some days, Howard had to change the whole shooting schedule in the middle of the day to fit Crowe's actions. For Howard, that definitely meant making tough choices, changing coverage, or adjusting sets just to keep moving forward. It was Howard's ability to absorb chaos without passing it to the crew that kept the film's rhythm working. This was the final act of balancing, keeping the production disciplined enough to deliver, but still letting it bend and stretch where it could capture the brilliance Crowe could produce when everything clicked. Howard would, years later, talk about the experience with his typical polite grace. "Some actors you steer through the scene. Russell, you just hold on tight and hope for the best," he said. The tension didn't matter in the end because the result showed Crowe's performance as Nash was among his best work, mixing vulnerability and obsession, powering the whole movie. The design and energy Howard built created broad frames where the emotional whirlwinds never drowned the story. Together, they made something that neither of them could have created alone. Of course, the partnership weighed heavily on them. Behind all the Oscars and all the critical praise, Howard left the project completely, drained and unwilling to work again with an actor, whose process required so much negotiating. Was that magic moment when a director, who prizes trust and predictability, found it to be both exciting and exhausting. He had captured lightning in a bottle, but not without burning his hands in the process. Crowe was different, though. In interviews, Crowe defended his intensity as an essential part of his artistic nature. "I don't show up to be liked," he said. "I show up to find truth in every moment." He didn't see it as ego, but rather commitment. Yet, that same commitment could sometimes look like defiance. Crowe later stated his respect for Howard but hinted that Howard's steadiness could be limiting. "Ron likes things clean and comfortable," he said in one interview. Real art isn't comfortable. They still had mutual respect, but the gap between their philosophies was too wide for either to dare cross again. Asked in 2015 if he would ever work with Crowe again, Howard smiled and said, "Some collaborations are meant to happen once." In the end, A Beautiful Mind was both a triumph and a warning story, showing that even creative harmony comes with conflict. Above all, it strengthened Howard's belief that filmmaking is the art of channeling genius democratically, not just controlling it. His patience during that storm became a defining feature of his leadership style. Calm, flexible, quietly authoritative. Crowe's brilliance lit up the screen, but Howard's restraint made it manageable. Genius versus process, as it were, wasn't a feud. It was a study in contrasts, a test of whether two artists could meet in the middle without completely losing themselves. They did for a moment. That moment won awards for both Crowe and Howard. It also taught Howard a lesson that would last. Not all magic can be repeated. Not every storm is worth weathering twice. If you think you've heard all of Ron Howard's secrets, the next one will shock you to the core. When Happy Days premiered in 1974, Ron Howard was already a familiar face to America. The former child star of The Andy Griffith Show had grown up in front of the camera. Now, as Richie Cunningham, he played a new kind of nostalgia. The wholesome, all-American teenager dealing with friendship, romance, and small-town life in the 1950s. The show was designed around him. He was the heart and moral compass of the story. Then in walked Henry Winkler, leather jacket over his shoulder, voice cool and casual as Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli. The Fonz was supposed to be comic relief, a tough guy with a soft spot for Richie. But within one season, something unexpected happened. The side character became the show. Audiences couldn't get enough of Winkler's charm. He was rebellious but kind, cool yet caring, the kind of guy everyone wanted to be or be friends with. Fan mail poured in, and the studio bosses took notice. Before long, scripts were being rewritten to feature more Fonzie and less Richie. Storylines that had once centered on Richie's moral struggles now focused on the Fonz's adventures. Even the show's marketing changed. Posters, magazine covers, and interviews increasingly featured Winkler. Howard, who had been the show's anchor, suddenly found himself orbiting a new star. One crew member later admitted, the irony was brutal. The clean-cut hero was getting overshadowed by the rebel in the leather jacket. At first, Howard tried to brush it off. He was professional, grounded, and genuinely liked Winkler as a person. The two shared mutual respect and no open fighting. But inside, it hurt. For an actor who had carried the show from its first episode, watching the creative focus shift was painful. Years later, Howard would describe that period with measured honesty. There were times I questioned my place on the show. I didn't resent Henry personally, but I absolutely resented how the story shifted around me. What made it worse was that none of it was anyone's fault. Winkler hadn't schemed his way into stardom. He'd simply connected with audiences in a way no one had expected. For Howard, it was an early education in the cruel unpredictability of fame. The tension wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet and professional. There were no shouting matches, no public fights, just a subtle shift in dynamics. Cast members later remembered that Ron kept his composure even as his screen time got smaller. His work ethic never weakened. But those close to the production noticed a difference in his energy. The easy enthusiasm that defined his early seasons dimmed slightly. He still gave performances with warmth and authenticity, but he had begun to look beyond acting. On breaks, Howard spent time watching the crew, asking questions about cameras and lighting. The young actor who once dreamed of storytelling from the inside was now preparing to step behind the camera entirely. In an unexpected way, Happy Days gave Howard his final push toward directing. Being overshadowed didn't just hurt his ego, it clarified his purpose. He realized he didn't want to chase the spotlight anymore. He wanted to build it. Instead of resenting the shift, he studied it. He learned how audience chemistry could reshape a production, how networks adjust around ratings, and how to manage creative egos without losing the bigger picture. Those lessons became foundational to his career as a filmmaker. Later, when asked about that transition, Howard said, "It taught me that stories change, and so do people. You can either fight the change or learn from it." He chose the latter. Looking back, there's something poetic about it all. The show that once made him feel replaced also gave him the insight to become one of Hollywood's most respected directors. His friendship with Winkler lasted, proof that professional friction doesn't have to destroy personal bonds. In fact, decades later, the two would publicly praise each other, with Winkler calling Howard the most generous soul in the business. What began as a quiet competition ended as mutual admiration. When the side character eats the show isn't just a story about a stolen spotlight. It's about humility, growth, and the grace it takes to step aside and still shine. For Ron Howard, losing center stage on Happy Days wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of everything that came next. When Ron Howard signed on to direct Ransom in 1996, it looked like a dream collaboration. He was already Hollywood's steady hand, calm, methodical, and deeply respected. Mel Gibson, meanwhile, was at the peak of his stardom. Braveheart had just swept the Oscars, and he carried himself not just as an actor but as a creative force in his own right. The pairing promised fireworks, two complete professionals pushing each other to greatness. But what unfolded was less a partnership and more a tug-of-war for control. To outsiders, the tension was invisible. On screen, the film was tight, powerful, and perfectly crafted. Behind the camera, it was a battle between two leaders, one who guided through quiet authority and another who led through sheer force of will. From the start, Gibson's presence dominated the production. He was passionate, sharp, and full of ideas. But that passion came with strong opinions about everything: camera angles, pacing, dialogue, and even the tone of the performances around him. Howard, who preferred teamwork over confrontation, suddenly found himself dealing with an actor who wanted to shape every detail. "Mel doesn't just act in a scene," one crew member recalled. "He wants to design it, direct it, and sometimes even rewrite it." Normally, Howard thrived in creative discussions, but this wasn't a discussion. It was a debate. Every adjustment became a negotiation, every take a vote on creative control. For a man known for harmony, the constant friction was exhausting. The biggest clash came during the filming of a tense kidnapping scene, one of the emotional anchors of the movie. Gibson reportedly stopped production several times to suggest different line readings and staging choices, insisting the sequence wasn't hitting with enough raw intensity. Howard listened, adjusted, and tried to balance artistic respect with directorial authority. But the more he gave in, the more Gibson pushed. "Ron's a diplomat, but even he has limits," said a lighting technician from the set. That day, you could see him calculating every word, trying to keep the peace without losing control. Eventually, Howard had to make a rare executive decision, freezing production until the scene could be reset his way. It wasn't anger, it was precision reasserting itself. For Gibson, though, this wasn't rebellion. It was art. He approached, acting with the same intensity he brought to directing, believing the process demanded full emotional and creative investment. To him, pushing boundaries was a form of commitment, not disobedience. In later interviews, he praised Howard's professionalism but admitted they had very different rhythms. "Ron's the calm eye in the storm," Gibson said. "I'm the storm." It was a fair self-assessment. His explosive energy made Ransom electric, but it also turned each day into a balancing act between brilliance and burnout. For Howard, who built his career on balance, the experience reinforced an essential truth: two captains can't steer the same ship. Despite the chaos, Ransom was a triumph. Critically praised and commercially successful, the tension didn't ruin the movie, it fueled it. Gibson's performance as a desperate father on the edge felt real and powerful, and Howard's direction gave it clarity and structure. Together, they created something that vibrated with controlled chaos, the perfect fusion of their opposing styles. But when the dust settled, Howard walked away with mixed feelings. He had proven he could manage a strong personality without losing the film's integrity, yet the toll of that management was steep. The constant push and pull had left him drained. Though he never spoke badly about Gibson publicly, those close to him knew the partnership had reached its natural end. Get ready for our number one moment. When Ron Howard names this final actor, it will blow your mind. When Ron Howard was offered the chance to direct Marlon Brando in the mid-1990s, it felt like destiny. Brando wasn't just an actor. He was the actor, the man who had changed cinema forever with a streetcar named Desire and The Godfather. For any director, working with him was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For Howard, it was something deeper, a childhood dream colliding with professional validation. He had grown up studying Brando's performances, admiring his ability to disappear into a role. Now he would have the chance to guide that same force from behind the camera. But what began as a dream collaboration quickly fell apart into one of the most difficult experiences of Howard's career, a sad reminder that sometimes legends are best admired from far away. The project itself was meant to be prestige material, a generational drama centered on an aging patriarch confronting the cost of his legacy. On paper, it was perfect for Brando, emotionally complex, grand, yet intimate. But by this stage of his life, the once electric actor had developed a reputation for not caring, being eccentric, and outright rebelling on set. When production began, those rumors proved true. Brando showed up late, frequently unprepared, and insisted his dialogue be written on cue cards scattered around the set. Crew members remembered that his focus seemed to drift from moment to moment, as if the script itself were just background noise for whatever thought he happened to be having. Howard, known for order and efficiency, suddenly found himself directing a living legend who didn't seem interested in being directed at all. At first, Howard approached the challenge with patience. His philosophy had always been that respect earns respect, and he hoped that by accepting Brando's quirks, he could earn his trust. But it quickly became clear that this wasn't a case of creative experimentation. It was disrespect. Brando would disappear for hours without warning, demand entire scenes be rewritten, or decide mid-shot that he wanted to explore a different motivation, throwing the crew into confusion. One assistant director described it bluntly. Every day felt like gambling. You didn't know if you were getting genius or chaos. The unpredictability wasn't exciting. It was exhausting. And for a filmmaker who thrived on preparation, it felt like steering a ship through fog with a captain who refused to read the map. The breaking point came during a simple dialogue scene. What should have been an afternoon's shoot stretched into an ordeal that lasted hours. Brando stopped filming repeatedly, said the lines were beneath him, then wandered off set without explanation. When he returned 3 hours later, he announced he'd reimagined the character and wanted to start over from scratch. Howard, ever composed, tried to accommodate the shift while keeping the production going. But privately, the strain was enormous. Crew members later recalled how the normally unshakable director seemed more withdrawn, calculating how to save the film around its unpredictable star. The production limped forward, but the damage was done. What was meant to be a defining artistic collaboration had become an exercise in survival. In the end, the project never saw completion in its original form. The publicly given reasons were creative differences and scheduling problems, but everyone behind the scenes understood that the project had simply become impossible. Brando's behavior had destroyed morale, disrupted schedules, and tested Howard's legendary patience past the breaking point. For someone who had worked hard for a reputation of professionalism, this was a painful chapter, and it served to quietly shape his thoughts about leadership. In interviews, he would later say, without naming names, "Some legends earn their reputation through their work. Others earn it through their behavior. It's important to know the difference." The point was made. Talent, however legendary, cannot excuse disrespect. And there you have it. The 6 actors who pushed Hollywood's nicest director past his limit. Even legends have breaking points, and Ron Howard's list proves that respect on set is never guaranteed. Which name surprised you the most? Do you think he was too patient or not patient enough? Let us know in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories. And don't go anywhere. Click the video on your screen right now for another shocking behind-the-scenes deep dive.